Hello everyone. My name is Amitai Richman, and welcome to this live session titled AI-Driven Test Data Management Live Demo. With me is Simon McVeigh. Hi, Simon. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, my name's Simon McVeigh. So I run sales engineering for K2View, and looking forward to going through this and giving you a live demo today.
Excellent. So we're looking forward to seeing that, Simon. I just want to take care of a little bit of housekeeping. There's a question mark button on the top right of the page. That's for you guys to submit questions throughout the session. Please, if you have any questions along the way, please go ahead and submit. Underneath that, there's also a graph icon. There's going to be a poll going live soon. Check that out soon, please, and vote. We're gonna talk about it soon. And there's also a paperclip, which is a file attachment. There's a research brief by Blue Research about our K2View test data management solution. So please feel free to download that. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. So we're going to talk about the top challenges around test data. And then Simon is going to demonstrate our TDM from the very beginning of PII discovery through masking production data to test data management, synthetic data generation, and beyond. We're going to talk about AI. We'll talk about best practices, and we're going to try to leave time at the end for Q&A. All right, so before we start, just a few words about K2View. If you're not familiar with K2View, so we are a data product platform with lots of different solutions, including test data management, data masking, synthetic data generation, data tokenization, and other use cases as well. We're covered by various analysts, including Gartner. We're in Gartner's Magic Quadrant as a visionary. Simon, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think the main takeaway from this slide in particular is just that we are very much used to being deployed in some of the most complex IT environments that exist out there. So really just been put through the ringer many times. So we're able to operate at massive scale with some really complex and sophisticated kind of environments, very highly secure, or whether it's banks all the way through to retailers and telcos and so on. So we've got a platform that can really perform at scale.
Awesome, and we're looking forward to getting into it. Before we do that, let's just take a quick look at some of the common challenges we see in the market. So one of the most common challenges that we see and hear from customers is the challenge of accessing and connecting to various data sources and extracting from their test data. So it can be, could be structured databases, but it's oftentimes legacy systems, mainframes, or perhaps new unstructured NoSQL databases. And getting test data out of them often is a challenge. And whether you have a tool or not, a challenge that often exists is waiting for test data. So many times, people who need test data, whether they're developers or QA team, QA engineers, are struggling waiting for test data to arrive in their environment for them to be able to use it. And of course, it's a question of finding and subsetting the test data you need. So if you're testing an application and you're trying to check a specific edge case, then having all data available is not necessarily helpful. You need actually a very specific type of customer or list of customers, for example, to check. Another challenge that is common is that there's lots of PII scattered around various data sources and networks and systems. And as we all want to be compliant with privacy regulation, it's a struggle sometimes to find all of the PII in the various places, and of course mask it when we're moving that data to lower environments. Now, something that's been a buzzword in the last few years has been synthetic data. There's definitely a very good use case for synthetic data. We're going to look at it today. And it can be a challenge, though, to generate accurate synthetic data that matches the same level of complexity that exists in production environments. And lastly, a common challenge that we see is that the people's software delivery lifecycle have been moving into an agile and DevOps methodologies and have becoming faster and faster. But test data is often a bottleneck and is not being able to be integrated into those DevOps pipelines. So let's do a quick poll now. If you click on the poll button on the right, it's a graph that says poll. Please go ahead and share with us what are the biggest the one biggest challenge you have around test data in your organization. We're going to carry on and start the demo in a moment, so you guys please vote as soon as convenient, and we'll come back to review those results soon. We're going to jump into the software in a moment and look at K2View's test data management solution, K2TDM. Simon, can you please take it away?
Absolutely, yeah. So, just before we get into actually seeing this in action, I wanted to just make sure that there are just a few things that are really clear before we go through this. So the first thing that I want to just spend a little bit of time on is, obviously the approach of generating and managing test data is not a new problem, but if you look at the ways in which this is usually taken care of, and you can stay on that slide, Amitai, that's fine. Really the thing that is most unique, there's a lot of things that are unique about our approach to this, but one of the most unique aspects of this is actually the way that we organize and store the data. And the reason I bring this up is because it may not be immediately apparent as we kind of go through this, just how we're able to do kind of the level of coverage of different types of either masking or synthesis scenario at scale. And it really comes down to this unique way of actually storing and managing the data. And so, this was several years ago, the beginning of K2View. The founders really asked an important question, which was, why are we storing data and managing data at a table level, right? When that's not really how we actually end up consuming it. And so if you think about the flow of data, throughout an entire environment, all the way from the source through to the target and everything that happens in between, and you think about use cases where you would need to know about that customer at different levels different levels throughout the schema, it can be really, really complex to manage that at a table level. And so really the question was asked, and the answer was instead of managing table level, which can get very, very complex, very time consuming, instead, wouldn't it make more sense to actually model the entity itself? And so whether this is a customer, a policy, it could be a transaction, it could be a location, whatever that entity is, in K2View, what we do is we model that entity. And that means that we know exactly, let's say you've got 50 or even 100 tables in across multiple systems that are required in order to create an entity called customer. Then you have two choices. Either you can manage it at table level and then pass all of that complexity onto your testing team, right? So they have to know, for example, if they're going to subset the data, they have to know all the tables that they need to go to with all those primary and foreign keys and all of that. It's a lot of complexity. The alternative is we model it in the micro database, as we call here, in the business entity. And that then means we can deliver a self-service experience that abstracts all of that complexity away. And you're going to see an example of that when I get into the demo. And the other thing that it really enables us to do, which is quite unique, is if you need to know when you're masking, let's say that you're masking an address, for example. If you're masking an address and you need to know the state, or you need to know the let's say the department that this particular customer entity is part of, and you're going to mask the address in a different way, or you're going to do something different to that entity, that's a perfect example again where it's very powerful having the micro database in memory when we do that, because we can use that logic to make decisions about how we mask.
Simon, can I interrupt you for a second? I apologize. It seems that we're having a technical issue. Some users are saying that they're not seeing the screen. Also, I'm not seeing the slide. So let's try to see if we can get that back for a moment. So if you just give me, you know what? I'm going to try to move to the next slide. And can you just continue your train of thought, please?
Yeah, definitely. So hopefully everybody can see this slide. But basically, this is really the best visual to think about the platform, the TDM platform, as an entire end-to-end solution. And so a lot of when we think about the challenges that we were coming up against earlier, a lot that we hear from different testing teams, QA teams, is that they're taking full copies of production. That's taking a long time with a lot of manual effort. They've got to find the PII, they have to mask it, they've got to, maybe they're not even able to subset because it's just too complex to do that across the schema. And then trying to get that data in and mask it and then provision it into the target environment, or even try and synthesize it. It's really important to have an end-to-end approach. It's not enough just to have like let's say an LLM that's synthesizing some data and it generates data and then you're kind of on your own at that point when it comes to provisioning. You really need an end-to-end solution. So what we provide here is the ability to go all the way from the source system, so connecting directly to production. Now, you don't have to do that. But it's certainly a fairly common practice. You connect to production, and that can be NoSQL, it can be SQL, it can be files, it can be mainframe. We have incredibly broad connectivity. Within the SE team, we always make the claim, we're sure that there's probably a system out there that we can't connect to. We just haven't found it yet. And so we have very, very broad connectivity. And then when we're bringing that data in, we're using the catalog that I'm going to show you in a minute to actually discover the PII automatically using rules. And then once we've discovered that, we're applying different masking algorithms to consistently mask that data. And that means that anywhere that I mask my entity, for example, so if it was Simon McVeigh and I mask that to something else, then anywhere that record appears in the entire schema in my target, it's going to be consistently masked to the same value. Really important for testing teams to be able to have consistency over multiple systems, an entire schema. So then, if you look at that, then I mentioned about the way that we organize that data. So storing these entities, we actually store every single one of these entities in an encrypted format, which has its own 256-bit AES encryption key, so highly secure. And that's your test data store. You can pull from that test data store, as we'll see. So you could actually have a set of golden data sets that you provide for the QA team, and they could be pulling from that test data store rather than having to go back to production. And you may only want to go back to production just for any data that's changed. So if you look at where I have operate here, these different verbs essentially that you would carry out on the data, we have the ability to subset, really important one that's often overlooked because of the complexity of the schema. But because we model the business entity, we're able to subset using business parameters rather than expecting your testers to know all the ins and outs of the schema, okay?
Simon, if I can interject for a moment, please. Just to report the results of the poll, the second most popular answer was what you just said now, that subsetting test data for a specific test scenario is their biggest issue. The first highest one was identifying and masking PII. So the top priority is identifying and masking PII. So it's good that we're going to talk about that today. But the second highest priority and issue, perhaps, and challenge is the subsetting that you're discussing now.
Yeah, that really doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, most of the teams that we work with, there's a kind of evolution of maturity in test data management. And usually the teams are struggling at that early part. Like they've got PII in their lower environments. They're not sure where they are, which is huge regulatory risk just in that alone. So that's a big concern. And then really the biggest barrier to subsetting is because you have to know the database inside out in order to be able to do that. Or you have to be sat with a DBA. Maybe you have to send the request off to the IT teams to get you to ask them to actually provision the data. This is the same reason why we see a lot of teams doing full copies of production, and they'll do a full clone of, a 5 terabyte database, for example, and they're doing that on a regular basis. And because they can't subset, all of their lower environments also need to be much more powerful than they would if they could deal with smaller data sets. And so that means more cost, more time, more complexity, and ultimately just getting in the way of testing the application. Now, there are scenarios where you'd want a lot of volume, and we're going to look at that, and that typically we can deal with by cloning, right? If you don't care about all the little variations in the data and you don't need the data to, you don't need a million records that are different, you just need a million records for performance testing, then actually cloning can be a really effective way of taking a single entity and cloning the whole thing. And so this is different to cloning a record, right? You're cloning the entire schema for every entity. And then we can automatically provision that into the target environment. A couple more things before I leave this slide, just before we go into the demo. So following along under operate, that third column, we're also able to do things like aging data. So this is very common in the banking and insurance industries, where you've got, imagine something like a loan, right? And you're trying to create a scenario where you have an aged loan. Let's say you want to fast forward that loan 10 years into the future. Well, in order to make it fully realistic, all your loan payments need to be created and synthesized to map to that 10-year-old loan that now has 10 years worth of payments. And depending on which state you're in, you might want to amortize it in a different way, using different amortization tables. So that's an example of aging, where we have the logic and we have a workflow engine that's able to calculate exactly what synthesis needs to happen to age that appropriately. And then the last things I'll just cover here, reservation, there's a really big one. So if you're working shoulder to shoulder alongside other QA leads, other testers, then a big problem is people deleting your data, right? You're in the middle of doing some tests, somebody deletes all your data, and then you have to go and recreate all of that, and you're having to down tools while you do that. So what we do is we make it possible to actually reserve the records, reserve the entities, so nobody else can overwrite that while you're doing your tests. It's a way of locking it exclusively for your own use. And we can also do things like rollback. So when you're creating a snapshot, this can be for two reasons. One, because you want to actually create a golden data set. So this is if you know exactly what data is needed for testing purposes, and you want your QA team to just be able to pull from these golden data sets, then that's very useful, being able to create these snapshots and then just pull from them. You can get test data very quickly. The other reason is because maybe you've made a change and it needs to be rolled back to a previously known state, or you're trying to reset an environment back to a known state. So we snapshot this entire schema and we can do a rollback of any of those entities back to a previously known state. And then the last thing here is, obviously we don't want to just generate the data, we want to actually load it. Now the loading process across, imagine a schema that has 500 tables, and you've got referential integrity that needs to be respected. You've got load order, you have reference tables. All of that needs to be taken care of in the load process. And we have comprehensive support for self-service provisioning of data into these target environments. And everything that you're going to see today is going to be in the self-service portal. But it's worth remembering that we can control everything through the APIs as well. We offer a full suite of APIs with interactive documentation. And so if you want to build your own UI, or you want to actually more likely bake this into your DevOps processes, so you fully automate the provision of test data, that's a very common scenario for us that we would cover through Amitai Jenkins or whatever automation software you're using to use the APIs. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a kind of a visual overview of the platform. It is very comprehensive, and it's really an end-to-end process. And with that, I think, Amitai, we're going to take a look at the catalog first, right? So so I'm going to actually share my screen, and we're going to start there. So let me just do that quickly now. Okay, so just let me know if you should be seeing, hang on, let me see, did I get the right window? I'll just share my entire screen here. Okay, you should be seeing a blank catalog. Is that what you're seeing?
No, we're seeing the discovery job execution monitor.
Yes, that's right. So it basically it's a blank screen at this point. So I've logged into our self-service environment, and I've actually gone into the catalog here. Now, in this scenario, imagine that I am an infra-security lead. So my responsibility is to make sure all the PII is protected. And I've just been informed that there's a brand new connection that we've established to is actually, in this case, a Postgres database that we have that contains all of our CRM data. And I want to actually come through and run an automated scan of this. So I just hit play. Now this is something that would usually run on a schedule, right? So it would be happening automatically in the background. But this is actually going to do a live scan of this database, and it's classifying all the data that it's finding. It's looking at both the structure, and it's looking at the data itself as well. And it's doing two stages here. One is to classify. So in this case, it's identified 46 fields. It's then classified them into 7 different classifications, and of those classifications, we've already marked we've got some rules that define what we class as PII, personally identifiable information, and in this case, it's found 23 fields that are potential PII. Now, if I go to the navigator here, I actually get a visual representation of this, and so I can see the schema and the relationships that it's identified. I can also see here that several of these fields have been classed as PII. So, for example, here we're looking at the state field. This has automatically been identified as PII. Now, if I disagree with this, I can definitely come in and make some edits here. So I could say, actually, we don't consider state to be a PII for whatever reason, and I could just change that. In this case, I'm just going to leave it, so I'm going to discard those changes. I could also create relationships manually in here if I wanted to override, or there was a relationship not present in the data. Now, one question we get asked quite a lot here is, if you already have a catalog, then what do you do? So if you're using an enterprise catalog already, that's actually quite common scenario for us, where we would use the catalog that you're seeing here to be automatically scanning your environments, but we can augment it and enrich it with data from your catalog. So if you have one in place already, we would make real-time API calls to that catalog, and we can augment that data in here. So if you had a particular field that was classed as PII in that external catalog, we'd be able to represent that in here. But if I go to the settings, and actually just before I move off this, I'll quickly just show you that you can even do things like comparisons in here. So if I compare for example, the previous version, I can see some color coding that's going on here. And it's identified a new date of birth field that's automatically been assessed as PII. And that was just pulled from doing that scan. So you can version over time, compare between the changes, and do things like schema reconciliation, other types of automated identification of changes in the structure as well. Now you might be wondering, like, how did we find that PII? And it really comes down to the classifiers here. We have a series of out-the-box rules that look at the structure and at the data itself. And then we also have the ability then in these, like if I take an example like Social Security, right, that's obviously going to be PII. And here I can say, I want to consistently mask that. That means every value that we mask, we're going to consistently apply the same masked value. We store a hash of that. We don't store the original data for obvious reasons because it's sensitive, but we actually hash that value and then can repeatedly ensure that we're generating consistent masked values for this. We also make it unique, right? So you may have like first name, you probably wouldn't want it to be unique, but Social Security is an example where you do. And here you can actually change the masking as well. So if I wanted, I could use the out-the-box masking, but I can also use a whole series of different masking rules that come out the box with K2View, and then you can also create your own. So we have an example here that's actually a custom Social Security masking rule that we use. And in our workflow engine, which for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through right now, you can actually build very sophisticated masking rules that even do things as far as like making API calls. For example, if you're masking an address, you might want to validate that it's not a real address, or you might want to validate that it is a real address. And you can make API calls, you can call out the databases as part of the workflow that handles the masking. But in this case, I'm just going to leave that as is and ignore those changes. Now that's so let's just take stock. What have we done? We've run the scan across this source system, in this case, a relational database. We've identified all the PII that's in here. And this is really going to help us when it comes to the masking, right? So with that, I'm now going to switch. So in this next, I'll just pause quickly. Was there anything, Amitai, that you wanted to add before I jump on to showing a TDM task being built out?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. It was great. Yeah, I just want to add that our latest version is actually has an additional way to discover PII, and that's through AI. So using large language models to look for PII in structured and unstructured data. So that's very exciting. So it's in addition to what you just demonstrated now. It's really phenomenal, and we look forward to showing you that soon.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. I mean, we have a lot of work that's going on to use AI to actually really increase the amount of automation. Like we had an example recently where the AI actually discovered first name spelt in German without any rules that had been set up for that. It was just because the LLM can look in multiple languages, and I identified that we had a sensitive PII data in another language. So there's some really powerful ways that the use of AI is actually speeding up, and not just speeding up, but also broadening the amount of coverage that we can have without having to think of every single rule out there. So yeah.
I also want to encourage the audience to continue sending in questions. We've received some, but if you have any questions up until this point, please feel free to send it in. As I said in the beginning, we'll try to leave time in the end for some Q&A. And if not, we'll get back to you after the session directly. Thank you.
Great. So in this example, I'm now, imagine I am a tester. So I'm part of a QA team. And I've logged into our self-service environment here. And I've just received a call from my boss, and basically she was explaining that we have an issue in production right now, and I need to get the data that relates to this particular issue, and I need to move it into my test environment. Actually, in this case, it's going to be through to UAT. Now, I want you to just think about what that would take for you to do that today in your current environment. Like, who would you have to involve? Would you need to involve a DBA, for example? Would you need to get a full copy of your production environment? Would you be able to consistently mask all the data and know where the PII is? In many cases, the answer is no, and it's going to be really complex. So just contrast that with what it can look like when you're using this self-service environment here. So I've got that call. I need to get moving. So I'm going to go in here and create a new task. And we give you this visual way to represent and see what from left to right you need to do to actually move this data and get the right data provisioned into this environment. So I'm going to give my task a name. I'm just going to say it's load 2 customers from production to UAT. Now I've given it a name. I'm going to select in the source environment here, and you'll notice that there's a few different options of the way that you would, that you can choose from here. So I'm going to choose entities and referential data. Now, if I wanted to deal table level, I could, right? I can literally just go in and select the environment, and I can choose, pick and choose from tables. That's the old way, right? A much more powerful way to do this is using the business entity that I talked to you about before. And so just by selecting customer here, I've literally selected the entire schema, and all of that is abstracted away from me. So I don't need to know anything about this underlying schema at this point. I can be really non-technical and still get data from production and provisioned into the target. Obviously, there's a couple of other options here that we'll cover later, which is, I can use rule-based generation. So this is when I'm actually synthesizing data. And I can also train an LLM to actually synthesize data that's representative of my training data. Very, very powerful. And if we have enough time, I'm going to show you a glimpse of that at the end. So in this case, I'm actually just going to deselect here because I don't want to send this data to Salesforce. In this case, is one of the targets. I just want to send it to Couchbase, Mongo, and then we have a CRM system as well. So, you have very fine-grained control over where you send that data. I'm going to select from production, and here's where I get a couple of interesting options. So first of all, you'll notice that it marks this PII as sensitive data is automatically masked. I do not have a choice. I can't override that unless I've got administrative level permissions. And so it's automatically taken care of. It's using all of the information, all that knowledge that's inside the catalog in order to know what to mask. And it's taking care of it for me in memory before the data is persisted anywhere. Now, I can also say I only want to go back to production when data is changed. So if I've already taken this data and put it in the test data store and it's fresh, then no need to go back and bother the production systems and put an unnecessary load onto them. I can just say, look at the test data store. If you find the freshest data there, great, use that. If not, go back to production. And you can actually manage these policies all the way down to individual fields. So you could have a policy for a specific field. So very fine-grained control as to when you go back to the source system for fresh data. Now, the other thing I'll point out quickly here is I could, if I'd already created a snapshot and I just wanted to pull from my snapshot, then I could just select, put selected snapshot here, and I could select from a predefined golden data set. In this case, I'm not going to do that because I actually want to pull it directly from production. And that's all I need to do there. So the next thing is I need to decide how am I going to select the entities that I'm interested in. Now, if I know the IDs, right? I could just put through, the customer ID in this case, and I could, directly select from production specific entities that I'm interested in. But let's imagine that I didn't know that, and I need to look at some filter criteria. Now, we actually enable you to select using business parameters. So in this case, let's say I'm going to take two entities from production, and I want them to be where they have a case type equal to billing. And you'll notice that it's identified 524 entities that have a case type of billing issue. And this is not the same as me having to select from specific fields and columns on a table. What I'm choosing is something that, as a business, as a tester, I will understand. It's not necessarily, these are not tables and columns. They're business parameters, which is quite different, right? So I don't have any underlying knowledge of the schema. And actually, this parameter here might map to 5 different tables that under the hood, and it may be like 15 different keys that have to be incorporated to make this possible. I don't need to know any of that, right? Very, very powerful when it comes to self-service. And so I could keep going here. I could say, for example, I want to make sure that they're in or that they're not in a certain state. I'm nothing against Texas at all, but let's say I didn't want them to be in Texas for some reason. Then I can continue building out quite complex filters here to select the exact entities that I want. Now, in this case, I'm going to just go back to the entity list. I'm going to just select the first few entities, and I'm going to move that through. Now, a couple more choices I have. I can create a snapshot of this data, just as simple as that. I just select this button and this checkbox, sorry, and it's going to create a version snapshot of the entire data set that I can then pull from again and again, or I can use to roll back to. I can also decide how long do I want it to sit in the test data store. Now, you don't have to retain it in the test data store, but it is stored. We can store it in a number of there's at least 10 different technologies that we can use to do the storage, anywhere from Azure Data Lake Storage to a Postgres database, or really anything that a wide range of different ways to store it that you can choose. And this is happening in your environment typically. So I don't have anything else to decide there. All I need to decide now is, where am I going to send this data? And you'll notice I've got a choice of testing environment, or I could send it to an AI model and actually train an LLM model from this data. And I'll come back to that a bit later. In this case, I'm going to send it to our testing environment. And I can see the full list here. As I said before, I don't want to send it to Salesforce in this case, so I'm just going to deselect that. And then here, I'm going to just choose UAT. Now think about that. UAT could be a collection of 15 different systems. In this case, our UAT is in this case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 different systems, right? But it could be it could be 15 different systems. And I don't need to know that. All I do is literally select UAT here. Now, I've got a few decisions that I can make about the actions I want to perform in this case. First of all, if these entities have already been loaded, then I might want to delete them, right? And this means to delete and recreate. And also because if I'm not generating new IDs, and I try and load data into that target environment and it's already loaded, then I'm going to have key conflicts, right? Now, I'm going to say I want to load it. If I hadn't selected delete, what I could do is say I want to replace all of the IDs. And in that case, it's actually going to generate completely new IDs for every table in that schema that's needed for this entity of customer. So think about that. It's literally generating all of the IDs to maintain the referential integrity, so that you would have your own data set stored, and you would have all the new IDs for it. So you could basically have your own data set that you're managing in that environment without anybody else impinging on that in any way. The other thing that I can do here is I could generate clones. So if I said, okay, I'm doing performance testing, I need 50,000 clones. I just take one of these entities and I can clone it 50,000 times or 1,000,000 times. It really doesn't matter. And it's going to sequence all of the IDs to make sure the referential integrity is respected, and then just create lots and lots and lots of copies of that same entity. Now, there is logic that you can apply. So if you said, I don't want to just create a clone, I want to actually do some manipulation of that data when I clone it, you can do that within the generation flows that are responsible for this. So you can get very fine-grained on how you control this flow. Now, in this case, I'm just going to delete and load. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reserve this and say, it's going to take me, let's say, about 5 minutes to do my tests. And during that time, I want to reserve this. And I'm working on a production issue. And that means that this reservation is going to lock up that data while I complete my tests. Okay. So at this point, I can obviously save the task here. There was actually one thing that I forgot to select there. Okay, so if I just save that, okay, there's something that I've missed on a selection. If I go just back to this menu here, just in the interest of time, I'm going to show you one that I just executed. So basically, when you complete the save of that, you go back to this menu, and you can see the task executions that have happened, right? So once you've finished, you can run that task. In this case, I literally just ran this a moment ago, and I can see the full breakdown of all of the logical unit execution that's happened. So this entity that I mentioned before of a customer actually has, in this case, when I did the previous execution, it was 5 processed entities, 14 cases. So customers have cases, and then cases have notes. And so you can see this entire schema, even though I'm only loading 5 entities, you've got the entire schema being loaded. And there's a lot more information that it breaks down about this. You can get kind of full kind of breakdown of the execution with a lot of detail about that. And this, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into more detail on this. However, at this point, what I've got is data that's gone all the way from production, all the way through to my UAT environment. And I didn't need to know anything about the database under the hood. I could do that fully self-service.
Yes, Simon, and our customers, use our tool in different ways. One of the things we see our customers doing is, for example, a QA team lead will set up some tasks. For example, it could be a subset or it could be a synthetic data generation task. And the team lead knows what the team is working on, and they know the system in and out, and they pick all the right choices, whether they want to reserve the data or not reserve the data, et cetera, et cetera. And then they save the task there in this list, and basically it's like a template where any tester can come and run that task at will and choose how many customers they want to pull from the database, et cetera. So you can start a task from scratch and have all of that functionality available. And on the other hand, you can also have these task templates where testers can go and just grab those and just fine tune exactly how many, what the parameters are, whether they want, VIP members only, et cetera, et cetera. So they can define this specific filtering criteria, pick the number of entities, hit go, and get the test data that they need.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think we're going to just jump here to talk about synthetic data generation. Is that where we should go next, Amitai?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so let me just jump past this. So So a couple of things that I just want to cover before we dive in and take a look at an example of this. And that's that there are a lot of different techniques to synthesizing data. And one of the things that you'll find with K2 View that is unique is that we believe that really the most important thing, the most beneficial approach that we can provide our customers is to have a single platform that can handle a wide range of different methods to synthesize data. So if you think about these different scenarios, let's say that you have no access to production. It's just, we speak to many organizations and the testing teams will say production's completely off limits. It doesn't matter whether we're masking PII or not. We cannot use production under any circumstances. Well, in that situation, you really need to synthesize data out of thin air. You don't even have data that you can train an LLM on because you can't get access to production data. And so that's a perfect situation in which you would want to use rule-based generation of data. So you're using business rules, and a bit like the parameters that I showed you before, to actually synthesize very realistic looking data that is based on those rules. Now, imagine a scenario where you do have access to production, and what you want to do is create very rich and realistic data that represents statistically, in terms of the distribution of data, it represents what you have in production. Now, if you were to try and do that with rule-based, it can be very complex because maybe there is a small segment of data in your production that you've never come across, and so you wouldn't know to generate a rule for that at design time, right? Instead, what you want to do is be able to scan that masked production data and then train the LLM on it and have it synthesize data that is statistically representative of the distribution that you have in your training data. There's obviously a lot of excitement about the power of LLM and what it can do. And it's important to remember that it's not a silver bullet. It's very exciting and it's hugely powerful. But just in that simple example, like if you don't have access to data to train the LLM on, then you're going to need to use rule-based anyway. And so what we believe is the most powerful approach is to create data sets from multiple different techniques. Perhaps you've used AI to synthesize the starting point, but you've got some edge cases for new functionality that doesn't exist yet in production. Then you might want to use rule-based to complement AI so that you can generate that comprehensive data set that has that full coverage. And then the last thing I'll just briefly say is that, depending on who you speak to, Gartner certainly share our view that data masking is actually a form of synthetic data generation. Why? Because when you're masking, you're actually creating fictitious people and addresses and things like that in order to mask the data. You're not just masking it to some random value that nobody can read. Those really are, and the final one I didn't touch on is cloning. I mentioned that before, the ability to clone large volumes of data for performance testing. This really makes up this rule-based approach to synthesis. So with that, and I do have a quick slide here that just shows the breakdown of what would push you towards one approach versus the other. So I mentioned, no access to production data. Maybe you don't even have that functionality yet. And then you've got scenarios that would push you in one direction versus the other. But the key is have a single solution that can comprehensively deal with all of them. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go just give you a glimpse of what this looks like in practice. So let's say I go back again to the same self-service UI here, and I'm going to show you two quick examples here. Now, let's imagine that I needed to synthesize data out of thin air. I don't have access to production, so I want to generate two customers and load to UAT. Okay.
Simon, I'm still seeing the PowerPoint slides.
Okay.
Hold on.
My mistake here. 1 sec. Okay. So you should be seeing.
Yep. Good, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. So yeah, I've come in, I've created a new task, and all I'm going to do is select entities and referential data here. In this case, I'm actually not. I'm going to select rule-based generation, and you can see that the source changes to rules generation. And then again, I don't have to know about the schema. Really important point that I know I keep stressing, but is a big shift away from a lot of complexity that I would otherwise need to be able to deal with here. I'm going to generate new data. I'm going to, in this case, just generate two particular entities that I need here. And these are the business parameters that I was talking about, right? So here I could start making some decisions. So say I want these to be based in New York. I want them to have at least one case record associated with it, but up to 5. Now, if I wanted to do even more sophisticated distribution here, I could. I can have a standard deviation, a mean, a minimum, and a maximum here. I can even do a weighted distribution where I have fractional distribution that I'm weighting accordingly, and that will be taken account of in the synthesis process. So a lot of, or I could just put in a fixed value here. A lot of different ways that you can generate that. And you can also, have each of these. These are actually pulling from the real data. So if I take an account name, for example, we have real account names that are in here that we could use to generate and synthesize data that aligns with a particular account. So all of these are data type aware. So these the input parameters that you select on here will be data type aware. And again, I don't have to do much more on this apart from make these selections. Then I can do everything after this point is the same as if I'd taken the data from production. So I can create snapshots of it. I can, if I wanted to create something to roll back to, and then I can decide how long I'm going to retain it in the test data store. And then when it goes through to the target environment, again here, sending through to UAT, I don't need to know all the ins and outs of that system. And I can then say, I want to load it and I want to generate new IDs. And if I wanted to, I could also reserve it so that it's reserved exclusively for my use. Now, that's literally all I would need to do that generation. And again, just like the task that I'd shown you before, once you execute it, you'd have a full breakdown of all the generation that's done. And that is all you would need to do to actually synthesize data and have it loaded all the way through into your production environment, or your target environment. Now, what I want to show you next is the ability to generate this data using AI. So I'm just going to switch. Hopefully you can see my screen here. Can you see this, Amitai?
Yes.
Okay. So I have this running in a separate environment, mainly because when you're doing generation, it actually it costs, because you have to use GPUs to train LLMs, as many of you may be well aware. So we have a pre-trained environment here that I'm going to use to just show you this example. Now, there's 2 stages when it comes to AI-based synthesis of data. The first is to train. And we train on full schemas. So that means we're training with all the referential integrity. We're training on the data, looking at something that would be taken really from your production environment is the best training data that you could have. And so imagine I'm going to show you in this case the one that's already built out, just so you can see it. It's a bit faster for me to show you this. So if I go here into this task, this is taking data from production, using the catalog to identify and mask the PII, just the same as we've seen before. And it's using a series of different business parameters to select the data. And then in the target, it's sending this to the AI training. Now, when I save and execute this, basically what it's doing is going off and training the model. And I probably should go back to this because I glanced over that a bit quickly. So this subsetting here that we're doing is really, really powerful, because we're basically then able to curate the data from production and be very deliberate about what we train the AI on. And so in this, I've got a simple example here of, it should have at least 5 subscribers and be in the state of Texas. But that could be any number of different business parameters. So you can create these data sets that are highly curated. And so when you synthesize data, that's the biggest control that you have over what gets synthesized, is what you train on, right? So it's a mental shift away from using rules to define, and instead thinking about a highly curated set of different data sets for different scenarios. And you would just literally send it to the AI training. And the end result of that is the second phase. So once I've trained the AI, I come into this task and I select AI as a source. So you'll see I've got 3 different trained models here. One was trained on 1,000 entities, another on 40, another on 100 entities. And I can say, okay, I just want to generate 10 entities in this case. I am not going to persist them in the test data store. And you'll notice that every one of the steps after this is just the same as if I'd taken data from production. It's no different, but it's completely synthetic. So then I can say, okay, I want to load that into my UAT environment. And obviously I could reserve, I could do all of those other things as well. And then, I would, once that executes, again, just the same as I showed you before, you basically have a full breakdown of all the synthesis. It goes through multiple stages, importing the data from production, masking it, then generating the data set from this, and then loading it into the target environment. So I know I've gone through a lot there. I'm going to stop because I know we want to just leave a few minutes for questions as well. So back to you, Amitai.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I'll take the first question, and if you could review the questions that have come in the meantime, please. And so somebody in the audience asked, how does K2View ensure that data is refreshed at regular intervals? So my answer to that, and feel free to add, Simon, afterwards, is that one of the choices that Simon made when he was subsetting data was whether to take the data available already in the test data store or to get the latest data from production. Actually the control is very granular at K2View. You can control how often the test data store will extract data from the production source, as often as you like. And anytime you subset data from the test data store, you can decide whether you want to take whatever's available, or actually, as you pull the data, pull the freshest version from the test data store. Now, the business entities are powering that Simon quickly explained earlier on. There's a lot more to go into that in another time, but that's how that is done. Anything you want to add to that, Simon?
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's moving away from this concept of full production copies and working with much smaller data sets that can be much fresher as well. Now, obviously, if you do want to do a full extract of production, that's possible too, but we want to move away from that ideally.
Yeah, we have less than a minute left. Are there any questions that you can answer in less than 60 seconds?
I'll do my best. So how do you maintain the schema as the business entity changes? That was a question from Melissa. So, essentially, as the schema changes, you can, as I showed you, pick up different versions in the catalog, right? So you're seeing changes happen in the schema over time. We have full schema reconciliation support inside of our studio. So you can basically automatically see that changes have been made and then decide what you want to do with those changes, whether you want to incorporate them or disregard them. So that's fully catered for. And then let's see. I could say
Simon, I have to stop you there. Sorry, we're out of time. But I want to say thank you very much, Simon, for this incredible demo. And if you in the audience, anybody in the audience would like to get a personalized demo, please go to k2view.com. We'll be happy to hop on a call with you, us or one of our colleagues, and do show you what it would look like in your environment. So thanks very much for attending this K2View live session. Thank you, Simon, and looking forward to seeing everyone at the next one. Bye for now.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.